Chapter 86, Challenge. Turning around slowly, Jialai slanted his head. The smile on the corner of his mouth was a little sinister. Liu Shi Dajie, may I play around with him? Liu Shi nodded his head and smiled. Without leaving any trace, he straightened his palm in front of him and perversely said, "If you have the chance, don't hold back." Jialai smiled and shut his eyes. Liu Shi's words had abruptly prompted him to recall a secret private conversation he had with Jialai Bai. Back then, Jialai Bai had just received the news of Ziyan having recovered his talents. After a long silence while wearing a gloomy face, Jialai Bai used an extremely solemn and cold voice when he finally spoke to Jialai. "If that boy ever accepts your challenge, you must not show any mercy. It would be best if you could kill him on the spot. Even if you are unable to, crippling him will also help the Jialai clan remove a potentially terrifying enemy." Gradually remembering the grave and chilling voice that his father used to deliver the message, the smile on Jialai's face grew increasingly sinister. His awful eyes gazed at the calm Ziyan a short distance away. He felt a premonition that the young genius would be killed by his own hands. Jialai's confidence originated from his own strength. In addition to the position of a 3-star doji, the Che method that he had trained with was a wind element Haizhuan hurricane chant. Adding the few do techniques that he knew, he was already able to be victorious in a challenge against a 5-star doji. Compared to him, even though Ziyan had his talent return was only 8 Duan Che at the coming-of-age ceremony. Even if his strength once again increased during this period, it was impossible for Ziyan to surpass him. Regarding this, Jialai had absolute confidence. Within the entire street, Jialai was not the only one who thought that Ziyan had no chance of victory. Even the observing mercenaries and Ziyu similarly thought that regardless of how outstanding Ziyan's talent was, the gap in the rank of the two was not something that anyone could ignore. Isn't this little rascal normally overtly shrewd? Why did he fall for that guy's lowly provocation? Seeing Ziyan who had a metal rod in his hand, Ziyu's face became bleak. Stepping forward, she cruelly scolded in order to protect Ziyan. "When have you become someone who doesn't know his limits? Knowing that you can't win, why did you accept the challenge? Are you tired of living, receiving the spurt of reprimands from Ziyu?" Ziyan merely shrugged and smiled. "We haven't even started fighting. It is difficult to say who is the one who is tired of living." You watching the stubborn Ziyan, Ziyu savagely stomped her feet. Her sexy long legs leapt to his front, blocking him. Next, she lashed her green whip in the air and releasing a splitting sound. "Let me fight in your stead. I know your potential is great, but that is something for the future." Watching Ziyu whose back was facing him, Ziyan was stunned. He did not expect that the woman who had always fought with him would in the face of others protect him to such an extent. He rubbed his head, unable to make heads or tails out of it. After which, he swept his gaze across Ziyu's back to her slender waist, her beautiful butt and finally landing on her pair of perfect and sexy long legs. Somewhat surprised at the perfect outline of this wild woman, Ziyan smacked his lips and quickly retrieved his gaze before the body's owner discovered them. His head leaned forward. When viewed from a distance, he appeared to be putting his chin on Ziyu's shoulders. "Hey, back then, didn't you wish for someone to beat me to death?" The sound of breathing beside her ear led to Ziyu's body instantly tense up. The delicate tip of her ear was quickly covered by a pink blush. A moment later, she took a deep breath and spoke with indifferent voice that hid a difficult to discern shiver. "You should clearly understand the value you have to the clan. Therefore, you cannot accept any challenges as you please. As your buyer, I have the right to protect you from some danger." What a strange argument. Ziyan could only helplessly scratch his head. "Forget it. I will settle my own problem. As a woman, you should stand aside." Finishing the sentence, he fiercely tightened his grip on the metal rod and turned his body to one side, bypassing Ziyu who had been blocking him. Stepping off the ground, he suddenly rushed towards the impatient Jialai. Watching Ziyan's actions, Ziyu became anxious. Just as she was about to knock Ziyan back with her long whip, a young lady's clear voice caused her to pause. "Ziyu barrier, have faith in Ziyan Zheizhe. He is not an impetuous person. If he did not have the confidence, he would not proactively provoke another." Zana turning around Ziyu watched the smiling Zana. Ziyu was stunned. All she could do was nod and sigh. Her hands, however, continued to grip her long whip tightly. Hey, little bastard, I will make you regret your foolish actions today. Staring at Ziyan, who was rushing over armed with a metal rod, Jia Liao laughed coldly. The pale green doche was quickly being embodied on his palm. Jia Liao stood on the spot without moving. His palms had suddenly changed into the shape of sharp claws. At the tip of his fingers, the green doche faintly formed 10 sharp wine nails. With a sinister laugh, he moved his hands. Together with a wine-breaking sound, he ruthlessly attacked Ziyan. Feeling the faint sharp sound of ripping air, Ziyan narrowed his eyes. He raised his left hand and ferociously punched the ground in front of him. A shapeless strong gust of air hit the surface and its reflected force suddenly halted Ziyan's advance. Seeing how flexible Ziyan was in controlling his momentum, the surrounding experienced mercenaries immediately exclaimed in admiration. At the moment when his body came to a stop, the metal rod in Ziyan's hand was released and continued forward. Just like a released arrow, it shot towards Jia Liao's head. Watching the metal rod flying towards him, Jia Liao smiled disdainfully. With the flip of the hand with the floating green doche, the air in front of him became turbulent and a few small green hurricanes appeared. After bypassing a few small hurricanes, the metal rod's strength was easily eliminated. Losing its strength, the metal rod fell onto the ground half a meter away from Jia Liao with a clear and loud crash. Observing Ziyan's offensive being easily overcome, the surrounding people could not help but sigh. Jia Liao, who possessed a high-level skill, seemed to be unbeatable. Chapter 87. Try to kill Ye. Ziyan's situation isn't looking too good. Looking towards the field at the weaponless Ziyan, Zining said nervously. Ziyu, with a calm and collected face, whispered, "Why should I care if he dies? He wanted to be a hero. Now he's better. He failed to become a hero and is being bullied by others while losing face." Slightly staying silent for a moment, Ziyu sighed. "Get ready to save him. Jia Liao, that scoundrel looks like he's out for blood." Zining nodded his head reluctantly and did not dare to get on her bad side. Compared to the nervous Ziyu, Zhano appeared to be exceedingly calm. The pupils of her eyes swept across the field and fell upon the disadvantaged Ziyan while her luscious lips held a faint smile. Sidestepping with some difficulty, Ziyan dodged Jia Liao's attack. Just as Ziyan retreated, Jia Liao closed in since the wind attribute technique amplified his speed. Clenching his fists firmly, with a fierce expression, Jia Liao heavily attacked towards Ziyan's head. With his back to the wall, unable to evade, Ziyan's face was still as calm as pond water and slowly let out a breath. A faint yellow doche ferociously rushed out onto his clenched fists. With an indomitable, violent manner, he finally started to direct clash with Jia Liao. Seeing that Ziyan chose to meet force with force against Jia Liao, the surrounding crowd could not help but make some commotion. The large discrepancy between the levels of both sides was obvious. If Ziyan had continued to choose to evade, then he could still stall the fight. But if he chose brute force, then he would undoubtedly be defeated. Just when everyone was about to feel pity for Ziyan, those firmly held fists of Ziyan suddenly spread out and a fierce formless pushing force abruptly appeared and ruthlessly smashed into Jia Liao's stomach. Jia Liao's stomach suffered an indescribably powerful attack as his quick and violent charge was immediately reflected back. His face became pale and with eyes full of maliciousness, a thought hurriedly flashed through his head. What Do technique is this? How could it be so strange? The faces of many people watching were astonished after seeing Jia Liao unexpectedly blown backwards. Vacuum hand, spreading out his palm and targeting Jia Liao, who was flying back. Ziyan, with an extremely sinister gaze, chose the best opportunity. Immediately, with a wild suction force, he ruthlessly pulled at Jia Liao. In midair, pulled back as if he were a leather ball, Jia Liao became extremely furious and gritted his teeth towards Ziyan, who was getting closer and closer while holding a trace of cruelty on his face. Cyan Doche quickly condensed onto the surface of his fist, unexpectedly forming into a small whirlpool. Lo Zhuan Do technique. Green wind whirling fist. The fist in midair brought a sound of piercing wind, while the immense wind pressure from the technique blew back the junk on the ground next to Ziyan. Slightly narrowing his eyes, feeling that colliding violent wind pressure, Ziyan's complexion gradually turned grave. His body, after a moment of silence, suddenly turned around. His right foot stamped firmly onto the wall with an enormous force, leaving a half-inch deep imprint. Using the wall's counterforce, Ziyan's body whirled around in midair and his right leg curved into a weird arc. In this moment, his flexible legs appeared as if they were as hard as steel. Octane blast. Pursing his lips, Ziyan's face was cold. His right foot in the air had finally stored up enough force, and under the gazes of the crowd, it met with Jialia's oncoming fist and made an explosion on contact. Don't get cocky just because you're a 3-star doge. At the moment foot and fist clashed, yellow doge rushed forth from Ziyan's right leg with a light sound, making Jialia's face change abruptly. Bang! Fist and foot collided as a muffled thunder arose from the point of contact. Gotcha! Right at the moment of contact, the sound of bones being broken pierced through the air. Following the noise, Ziyan and Jialia's bodies flew backwards at almost the same time. His body smashing heavily against the wall behind him, Ziyan tasted something sweet rise up in his throat and then spat out a mouthful of blood that sprayed onto the ground. Seeing that Ziyan had vomited blood, the mercenaries in the vicinity all sighed with regret. They all thought that Ziyan had already been defeated, but suddenly Jialio, who had fiercely slammed onto the ground, suddenly gripped his right hand. He rolled all about on the floor, releasing howls of anguish. Within the crowd, there was no lack of shrewd spectators. Once they noticed the grotesque shape that Jialio's arm had been twisted into, they couldn't help but draw a sharp breath, their faces displaying shock. The sounds of clamour within the crowd went silent at this moment. Gazes of astonishment fixated on the youth who was panting heavily near the wall. After a long while, cheers suddenly erupted into the air. Her red lips slightly pouted. Ziyu gazed in disbelief at Jialio, who was wailing miserably, and said in amazement, "That little bastard, he actually won. It seems that way. That guy's arm was broken by Ziyan." Zining swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Ziyan's ferocious attack made him recall the miserable condition he had been put in before. However, Jialio's current condition was obviously worse, about 10 times worse. Staring at the Jialio, whose bone was nearly sticking out of his arm, Zining could tell that this guy's arm was most likely permanently disabled. Hearing Zining's confirmation, Ziyu didn't speak for a while. Her vision fiercely fixated on Ziyan, who was gasping for air. So it turns out that this little bastard had already advanced into the doji realm. No wonder he wasn't the least bit scared. After sitting on the ground for a whole 10 minutes, Ziyan slowly climbed to his feet and swept a cold glance at the nearby Liu Shi, who gawked stupidly. Dragging his numb right leg, he picked up an iron rod at his side. He gazed ominously at the howling Jialio on the ground and drew over with difficulty. Jialio's attack from just a moment ago already revealed the murderous intent he had towards Ziyan. To those who wanted his life, Ziyan wouldn't be unnecessarily merciful either. Lying on the ground and staring at the Ziyan who drew steadily nearer, Jialio's face no longer held any hint of viciousness, but rather looked panic-stricken as he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He could clearly distinguish that look of murder in Ziyan's eyes, and couldn't help but hastily say, "I yield." Ziyan's face was completely expressionless and seemed as if he didn't even hear a word. He gripped the iron rod in his hand even tighter. Looking at that youth's steeled expression, even if it was the bloodthirsty mercenaries, they couldn't help but feel a bit frightened. The current Ziyan made it hard for people to believe that he and the previously ever-smiling youth were the same person. His steps halting, Ziyan towered above Jialio and stared at him. He suddenly grinned, but that full smile which showed off those pearly white teeth made Jialio's heart grow cold. Only now did he realize that this youth, who was normally as calm as a sheep, actually possessed a heart even more cruel than his. "Die, you scum!" Laughing lightly, Ziyan's pitch-black pupils suddenly radiated even sharper killing intent, and the black iron rod in his hand whistled fiercely through the air to smash towards Jialio's head. Chapter 88. Conclusion. Staring at the merciless Ziyan, Jialio's face turned white. A frightened expression enveloped his face. On the street, the observers spontaneously sucked in a breath of cold air as they watched Jialio about to be killed. Ziyan's decisive move led to many people changing their opinion of him. Ziyu opened her red and moist mouth as her entire body was utterly frozen on the spot. Ziyan's ruthless and decisive character had totally overturned the gentle image she had of him. She had never expected that the young boy who she usually fought and lost her temper with could practice ruthlessness with such familiarity. Everyone's gaze followed the metal rod in Ziyan's hands. When the metal rod was half a meter away from Jialia's head, however, there was a sudden, violent sound that was like a clap of thunder. On the street, someone abruptly called, "Brat from the Z clan, a challenger's purpose is to learn from each other. You actually dare to be so brutal." Hearing the furious scream, Ziyan narrowed his eyes, the edge of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Instead of stopping, the metal rod in his hand smashed downwards with an even more vicious force. "Move aside." Ziyan's action had obviously fanned the flames of the person who had shouted. With a curse, an extremely sharp wind energy was released, whistling forward. Like green lightning, it cut across the middle of Ziyan's metal rod, and instantly, the firm and hard metal rod was cleanly cut into midair. Ziyan's face changed when the metal rod was broken into two. Clenching his teeth, Ziyan wanted to ruthlessly pierce the remaining half of the metal rod into Jialia's throat when the green wind stuck once again. The strong pressure from the wind actually caused Ziyan to have difficulty breathing. Shrinking his eyes, he used all his strength to pierce forward with the metal rod. However, he was blocked by an invisible air film that could not be broken. Twitching his lips, Ziyan's right hand tightly gripped the rod as his body moved slightly and twisted over. The metal rod left his hand and became a black shadow, ferociously shooting toward the figure flying towards him. HMPH? Seeing that Ziyan had actually dared to attack him, the figure coldly snorted. His hands curled into claws and fiercely waved in front of him. The thick green doche formed a few pale green wind blades. Raising his finger, the wind blades left his hands and cut the metal rod into over 10 pieces. To have such a ruthless heart despite being so young. "Today, I shall teach you a lesson in Zijan's stead." The figure coldly laughed after cutting the metal rod into pieces. Within both of his palms, green doche was being quickly gathered. A cyclone gathered under his legs and lifted him into the air. Like a cannon, he threw himself towards Ziyan. A pale green wind blade appeared just as he waved his palm and explosively shot towards Ziyan. The air pressure originating from the wind blades blew the ground free of any dirt. "Teach me a lesson. Who do you think you are? You should discipline your son first." Ziyan shook his head and smiled coldly. From the attribute of the doche, he had recognized the figure to be Jialia's father, Jialai Bai. Ziyan watched the wind blades that were shooting towards him with a calm face. When they were 5 meters from his head, Ziyan violently struck his palm in the direction of the ground. A shapeless burst of air was released and upon coming into contact with the ground, pushed Ziyan's body into the air. He somersaulted in the air and landed on an empty piece of land dozens of meters away. The wind blades missed. With a clang, many deep scars were left on the hard rock surface of the ground. "Father, kill him." Seeing the figure who swooped down, Jialia's face was filled with unrestrained happiness as he viciously cried. Landing on the ground, Jialai Bai darkly glimpsed at Jialia's hand. His face slightly tensed and a cold killing intent appeared in his eyes. Without replying, he pushed off from the ground and once again frenziedly rushed at Ziyan. "Let me see just how great this genius of the Z clan really is." Only a short time had passed from the appearance of Jialai Bai to the hurried retreat of Ziyan. The crowd recognized Jialai Bai and began to boo. A doge had launched a sneak attack at a doge. "Wow, Jialai, you old dog. You big watermelon. You actually have the face to attack," Ziyan scolded. Seeing how Jialai Bai ignored the difference in their status and once again rushed towards him, Ziyan's face finally started to ashen. "Brat, after breaking my son's arm, you can forget about leaving in one piece." Jialai Bai stepped off the ground. Like the wind, he bizarrely appeared above Ziyan. A sinister expression flashed across his face. His fist fiercely tightened and a turbulent green doche quickly gathered into a huge swirl. "Crap. You are even using a Zhuan-level do technique. You old dog. You have brought shame on the entire Jialai clan." Feeling the ferocious strength that was gathered on Jialai Bai's fist, Ziyan's face turned very ugly. Secretly, he began pulling the black ring on his finger. A short distance away, Zana's face changed upon seeing the danger Ziyan was in. Slowly taking a breath, a golden flame appeared in her clear eyes. In the blink of an eye, the pale golden chair was beginning to emit an aggressive energy. Just as Ziyan was preparing to save himself and Zana was preparing to rescue him, a sudden loud yell filled with anger blasted across the street. "Fuck, you old dog! Since when has it become your turn to teach my son?" When the cry died down, a flame-covered figure sped over from beyond the marketplace. Stomping his feet violently, he was propelled with lightning speed towards the front of Ziyan and raised his head to roar like a lion, furious lion's rage. Looking awe-inspiring, Zizon tightened his iron fist and punched viciously at Jialai Bai above him. A huge red-collared lion head flashed on his fist. Boom! The green and red cho made contact and exploded like a thunder, causing the ears of most of the people on the street to ring. In midair, the two men engaging in combat shaked and hurriedly stepped back. As he was retreating, Zizon grabbed Ziyan with him. The two men stepped on the ground hurriedly as they retreated, with each footstep leaving a visible footprint on the ground. From this, it was obvious just how strong both parties were. Dissipating his QI, Zizon coldly stared at Jialai Bai just a short distance away. He coldly laughed. "Jialai Bai, you have really lived like a dog." To have the face to attack the younger generation, Jialai Bai's face was dark. His mouth slightly twitched as he pointed towards Jialai, who was lying on the ground. In a cold voice, he said, "He has hurt my son to such an extent. Zizon, you will give me an explanation." "Explanation? What explanation? If my son had not reacted fast enough, the one lying on the ground would have been him. If that had happened, would I hold you accountable?" Zizon sneered as he swiftly and fiercely scolded back. "This challenge was issued by your son. Everyone present can be a witness. Moreover, in a challenge, losing one's legs or arms is very common. Why are you making such a big fuss over it?" Zizon's ferociousness slowly faded as he said with a smile. Jialai Bai's face twitched in anxiety. He scanned the laughing gazes around him and knew that he had lost the opportunity to hurt Ziyan. Clenching his teeth angrily, he said, "Don't give me any opportunity, otherwise I will return the same sentence to you." Zizon's eyes flashed with a vicious glint as he smiled. Good. Let's wait and see." Jialai Bai nodded his head and smiled furiously. He went over to lift the groaning Jialai, turned around and left. As he passed Liu Shi and noticed the latter's shocked and speechless manner, the anger in him rose once again. Taking a deep breath, he suppressed his anger and said, "Mr. Liu Shi, let's go now." "That lady." Liu Shi unwillingly gazed at Zana nearby. With his eyes twitching, Jialai Bai was ready to kill, there and then, this idiot whose mind was filled with nothing but women. He tightened his fist. After a moment, he forced himself to put on an awful smile. "Regarding this matter, we shall discuss it further after returning home." "Oh, all right." Seeing the pain on Jialai Bai's face, Liu Shi could only unwillingly nod his head. His gaze once again obscenely swept across Zana's before reluctantly leaving the marketplace with Jialai Bai. Looking at the shameful-looking Jialai Bai and group out of the city with his eyes, Zizon let out a cold laugh. His gaze swept across his surroundings before turning around and facing Ziyan, who had a trickle of blood on the corner of his mouth. His gaze was gentle as he heavily patted the latter's shoulders. Sucking his lips, he regretfully said, "Your attacks are not vicious enough. Jialai Bai has only one son and today, if you had castrated him, Jialai Bai would have gone crazy. If that had happened, the three elders who were hiding outside would have had the excuse to kill him. Zizi, what a wasted opportunity." Hearing this, Ziyan was stunned. He could not help but roll his eyes. On the other hand, Zana and Ziyu's faces turned red at the dirty words as they stood on one side. Listening to Zizhan's words, the surrounding mercenaries felt their heads grow numb. No wonder the son was so vicious. His father was even more ruthless. Chapter 89. Dark and windy night. The silver moon hung high in the sky, emitting a faint moonlight that covered the ground in a silvery layer that gave it a mysterious look. After the disturbance in the day, Wuten City had become dark and quiet in the night. From within the houses on some streets, there was only the occasional sound of nightly activities. In a room in the backyard of the Z clan's home, a young man was lying on the bed. His eyes, as dark as the night sky, were filled with a cold quietness. "Teacher, what is your strength in your current state?" After a long quietness, Ziyin abruptly asked in a soft voice, "Why?" The black ring that he wore emitted a random response. A moment later, Yolo vaguely said, "Although I am currently in my soul form, I should have no problem handling some small flies like dodoshis or dolings with my heavenly flame." Hearing this, a slight happiness appeared on Ziyan's face. His eyes, however, still carried a coldness. "You wish to kill the boy from the afternoon?" Seeing Ziyan's behavior, Yolo asked with surprise. "Jialio isn't deserving of such effort." Ziyan smiled and whispered, 2 months is fast approaching and I am losing my patience to drag out the competition with the Jialai clan. Thus, I am hoping to secretly kill the alchemist called Liu Shi. Once he dies, the Jialai clan without any healing medicine will lose their remaining market share. Once that happens, even if their clan can continue surviving, their strength would have greatly declined and will no longer be able to threaten the Z clan. Oh, have you really lost your patience? Seeing your character, you don't appear to be an impulsive person. After a brief silence, Yao Lao's joking voice escaped from the ring. "It seems that you care a lot for the girl called Zana. All that guy did was to act a little dirty. Yet you bear such a deep grudge. What a jealous child." Hearing this, Ziyan's face warmed. The shame of having his thoughts so easily revealed arose his anger. From the start, I did not have much time. How can I continue to play with them? Even if I had not met that guy today, I would have started using some tricks. All right. It has nothing to do with the girl. Watching Ziyan's manner, Yolo laughed loudly. The mocking tone in his laughter caused Ziyan to roll his eyes helplessly. "Since you wish to take action, let's get going. I am just a soul, so I'll need to borrow your hands." Yolo ceased his laughter and said. Hurriedly nodding his head, Ziyan quickly jumped off his bed. He took out a red storage ring from his breast pocket and retrieved a large black cloak which he had prepared beforehand. He pulled it over his body in a practiced manner and the thin body of the young man was transformed into a bloated, mysterious black-cloaked man. "Let's go. You need not do anything. Just let me control your body. With my spirit encompassing you, you need not worry about anyone recognizing you from your scent." Seeing the well-prepared Ziyan, Yolo gave a smiling reminder. "Ah." Nodding his head, Ziyan easily reached the side of the window and scanned his surroundings like a thief. Only then did he jump out and his body quickly descended, following which, a mysterious strong strength was emitted from the ring on his finger. The mysterious strength quickly encompassed Ziyan's entire body. Immediately, the rapidly falling figure suddenly floated in midair. Stepping lightly off a roof, his black figure was like an eagle, silently speeding out of the Z clan's home and disappearing into the dark night. The dark and windy night presented a good opportunity to kill Jialai clan. Mr. Liu is really able to refine other medicine. In the well-lit hall, the originally anxious Jialai Bai was initially stunned upon hearing Liu Ji's pleased announcement before asking happily. Extremely satisfied with Jialai Bai's surprised manner, Liu Shi lifted the teacup beside him and took a sip. The expression on his face was very proud. "Besides healing medicine, I am able to refine something that's very suited for the mercenaries' use. The drug's called Explosive Strength Pill. It can raise the strength of the user by 10% for a short period of time." Hearing this, the happiness on Jialai Bai's face grew. If a drug with such effect could be refined, he could use it as an advertisement to attract quite a lot of people. He might even be able to once again suppress the Z clan. Unfortunately, this explosive strength pill cannot be refined in bulk like the healing medicine. With my current ability, I am afraid I can only refine 20 pills a day. Liu Shi said in a regretful voice. "Haha, 20 pills it is. We can create something like an auction, where the highest bidder will get it. In any case, the healing medicine is the main aim. We are only using this to raise our popularity." Jialai Bai waved his hand and said with a smile, "Hey, clan leader Jialai, I am indeed able to make this explosive strength pill, but according to our agreement, I am only responsible for making the healing medicine." Seeing how the explosive strength pill had attracted Jialai Bai, a thought struck Liu Shi and he abruptly spoke. Jialai Bai's face suddenly changed. The crafty man knew what the guy was planning. However, at this stage, all he could do was to laugh dryly and ask, "What is Mr. Liu Ji's meaning?" "Ha, relax. I know what kind of situation the Jialai clan is in right now, so I won't ask for much. Watching a relaxed Jia lie by, a sinister smile flashed across Liu Ji's eyes. All I want is clan leader Jia Lai to help me get hold of the lady called Zana. Before a smile could appear, Jia Lai B's face stiffened. The corner of his eye twitched. He had not expected that this guy, who was strongly driven by sexual urges, would actually directly target the Z clan. Mr. Liu Shi, if our Jia Lai clan touched a member of the Z clan, Zizon would have the excuse to openly attack us. By then, it would not be just a business confrontation, but actual violence. Sighing, Jia Lai Bai smiled bitterly. Tapping his finger on the table, Liu Shi quietly said, "This is not a matter for me to consider. I don't care if clan leader plans to forcefully snatch or stealthily drug her. All I care about is the result. As long as you can bring her to me, I will begin to refine the explosive strength pill." The corner of Jia Lai B's eye twitched. Despite his anger surging, he could only forcefully laugh. "Can you give me time to think? May I give you an answer tomorrow? Hee. It's just as well. Clan leader, you may think it over. Before I leave, I would like to add something. The Jia Lai clan and the Z clan have already become irreconcilable enemies. So why do you need to worrying about adding another grudge into the mix?" Laughing perversely, Liu Shi stood up, patted his backside and swaggered out of the hall. With hurried footsteps, he headed towards his room in the backyard. The lotus-like extraordinary young lady from the day had ignited the lust in him. All he wanted to do now was to find a young and beautiful servant girl to relieve his lust. Gazing at Liu Shi, who disappeared into a corner, Jia Lai Bai turned even more gloomy. It was only after a long time that he exhaled a long breath and thickly said, "This bastard, whose head is full of women, would sooner or later die at the hands of one." In a room at the backyard, Ziyan helplessly watched the knocked-out beautiful lady lying on the bed. Her body was covered only by a thin robe, exposing much of her naked body. "That guy's back," Yao Lo whispered from within the ring, causing Ziyan to quickly squeeze into a hidden corner. Through a small gap, his eyes managed to observe everything in the room. Creak, the wooden door was slowly pushed open. Liu Shi's discernible laughter instantly came from within the room. "Ho ho. Precious, I am here. Prepare to be ruined tonight. What a sperm-filled head idiot. Yao Lo, prepare to strike," Ziyan said in his heart as he coldly smiled and shook his head. "All right, wait. There's a change." Yao Lo shouted a warning just as he was about to agree, resulting in Ziyan's heart tightening. His forehead was full of perspiration after being frightened by Yao Lao's warning yell. Ziyan stayed where he was, not daring to move. "On your left." Within his heart, Yao Lao's voice once again emerged. Listening to the warning, Ziyan slowly turned his head. His gaze shifted to the window on his left and his eyes suddenly contracted. The originally closely shut window had already been unknowingly opened, allowing the pale moonlight to scatter into the room. In the blink of an eye, the emptiness in the window and its surroundings was strangely replaced by a young lady in a golden dress. Below the golden dress was a pair of jade-like round and white small feet, which drew an attractive arc in midair. Moonlight spilled into the room, shining on the exquisite face of the young lady. It was just like a goddess under the moonlight, beautiful yet mysterious. Gazing at the sudden appearance of the young lady, Ziyan felt his throat becoming dry. His heart softly moaned a name. Zana. Chapter 90. Arranging Everything. After staring at the young lady who had appeared beside the window like a ghost, Ziyan whispered in surprise, "What is she doing here? Hee. From the looks of things, it seems that she has the same intentions as you," Yao Lo softly said with a smile. Frowning slightly, Ziyan hid his entire body within the shadows. He immediately, but with some hesitation, asked in his heart again, "Zana's strength, why is it so overwhelming?" Looking at the speed at which she had appeared, it seems comparable to that of a Dordoshy. Her real strength is indeed what you usually see. For now, she is clearly using a secret technique that enables her to temporarily raise her strength for a period of time. Considering her background, being in possession of such a mystical secret technique is not something surprising, Yao Lo indifferently said. Hearing this, Ziyan was slightly shocked and bitterly laughed in amazement. Once again, his inner curiosity about Zana's mysterious background led him to sigh helplessly. Shaking his head, he stopped thinking. His gaze passed through the curtain on the opposite side and watched the strangeness unfold. Within the room, The sudden ghost-like appearance of Zun had yet to catch Liu Ji's attention. For the moment, he was entirely overcome by lust and had his pair of eyes staring at the beautiful woman on the bed. His hands were tugging at his clothes in a mad rush. At some point, Liu Ji's hand, which was tugging at his clothes, froze. As a 6-star doji, he had finally felt that there was something amiss. After a brief hesitation, he slowly turned his neck and his gaze shot to the widely opened window. On top of the window was a young lady in a golden dress, lazily leaning on the window frame. A pair of eyes which were filled with a golden-colored flame were indifferently watching the partially dressed man in the room. Floating above her white hand was a golden flame that was orbiting in an active and bewitching manner, much like a spirit. Liu Ji foolishly stared at the young lady who was bathed under the moonlight. He slowly shifted his gaze until it landed on her indifferent and exquisite small face. Within his eyes, a tipsy feeling emerged. Despite the wrong atmosphere, Liu Ji could not help but become slightly dazed in the face of the perfect face and extraordinary disposition. After being in a daze, however, Liu Ji abruptly turned around. Slamming his feet on the ground, his body crazily shot towards the main entrance like a released arrow. In this strange atmosphere and with a cold feeling of being near death, he knew that the young lady's sudden appearance was not a good sign. The room might have been spacious, but with Liu Ji's speed, he only needed a short few seconds to move from the bed to the front door. Seeing that the wooden door was within reach, happiness flashed across Liu Ji's eyes. Once he exited the room, he would be able to loudly call out for help. Once Jialibai heard his distress calls, he would immediately come over to rescue him. Unfortunately, just as he was about to touch the wooden door, he felt a sudden pain in his legs. His body, which was running at extreme speed, tilted and slammed against the floor and Liu Ji coughed out a few of his broken teeth along with accompanying blood. Lowering his head in terror, he saw that two fist-sized blooded holes had unknowingly appeared on both of his legs. The edge of the blooded hole was entirely black while emitting a faint charred smell. Somebody. There's someone who wants to murder me. The intense pain from his legs nearly caused Liu Ji to faint. However, he clenched his teeth and withstood it. Then he opened his mouth and screamed as loud as possible. "You can stop shouting. The room is surrounded by my aura. No one can hear you." The young lady leaning on the window edge said indifferently. A golden flame blade formed on the tip of her finger as she lifted it. It seemed like the injury on Liu Ji's legs was caused by this flame blade. "You? What do you intend to do? What do you want? Money? Medicine? I can give you anything as long as you let me go." Watching the young lady with utter terror, Liu Ji's face was utterly white. In the face of death, his lust was finally suppressed. Glancing impassively at the crippled Liu Ji squirming on the ground, the young lady lightly jumped from the window. With slow, continuous steps, she walked toward Liu Ji. Watching the Zuna who had lightly jumped from the window, Ziyan realized that her hair, which usually ended at her waist, had lengthened and extended down to her bottom. Apparently, this was another effect of the secret method. In the spacious room, the young lady wearing the elegant golden dress continued to head toward Liu Ji, who was groaning on the ground. When she was in front of him, she halted her footsteps, lowered her head and gave a sudden light smile. The instantaneous smile caused Liu Ji's heart to violently jump. "Didn't you wish to capture me?" Zuna's light voice was filled with coldness as she lowered herself. Liu Ji swallowed his saliva. His face was filled with cold sweat that originated from his fear. "I actually dislike killing." Seeing Liu Ji's terror-stricken face, Zuna suddenly sighed. Hearing this, a faint hope appeared in Liu Ji's eyes. Before he could beg for mercy, however, the sudden coldness that appeared on the young lady's face sent him to an even greater despair. "I don't mind a little pointless gaze. But why did you insult him? What right do you have to insult him? He might not take to heart what trash, like you, said, but I cannot allow it. Really cannot." As the young lady's voice abruptly turned cold, the golden flame blade above her finger was suddenly and violently released. It transformed into golden lightning and penetrated Liu Ji's chest. Instantly, a blooded hole appeared. Having received a fatal blow, Liu Ji's body suddenly contracted. His white face slowly went dark, while his slightly protruding eyeballs looked frightening. After indifferently glancing at the lifeless corpse, Zuna stood up and lightly sighed. The cold, small face exhibited a helplessness as she quietly whispered, If I were not worried of ZNJJ blaming me for being a busybody, the GLI clan would have long vanished from Wu-Tang City. All these troublesome matters would not have appeared if that happened. Shaking her head, Zana's gaze randomly swept the room before turning her body. When she appeared again, she was already by the window. With a light leap, she disappeared into the night. ZZ, to think that this girl who seemed to be so gentle and soft is actually decisive when it comes to killing people. Hey, it seems you have found something precious. Yao Lao's joking voice sounded from Ziyan's heart not long after Zana left. Bitterly smiling as he shook his head, Ziyan sighed once more. It seems that I have made a futile trip tonight. Hey, that's hard to say. Although that girl was merciless in her attack, she's too young and lacks experience. Yao Lao spoke with a smile. Hearing this, the stunned Ziyan immediately asked, "What do you mean?" Just watch. Yao Lao smiled mysteriously before becoming quiet. Seeing Yao Lao's manner, Ziyan could only shake his head and continue hiding himself in the dark. His gaze observed everything in the room. The dark room, with the exception of the servant girl's breathing, was utterly quiet. Ziyan waited quietly for over 10 minutes. Just as he was beginning to frown, the eyes of the haphazardly fallen corpse of Liu Shi moved. Beside the door, the hands of the originally lifeless Liu Shi had began to move slightly. A moment later, the closed eyes slowly opened while the grayness on his face had also disappeared. Looking at the blooded hole on his chest, Liu Shi took in a light cold breath. His eyes were filled with hatred. Damn girl! Had I not stolen some turtle breath pill from teacher when I left, I would have really perished here. Reaching out his hand with great difficulty, Liu Shi extracted a jade bottle from his breast pocket. He carefully poured some of the white powder on his wound before taking out a pale green pill and swallowed it without hesitation. After completing these simple action, Liu Shi's face once again turned pale. It will likely take at least half a year to recover from this serious injury. Tomorrow, I will ask the GLI clan to send me back and invite my teacher over. With teacher's help, the Z clan will not have any good days left. At that time, I will torture that woman until she dies. Liu Shi sinisterly clenched his teeth. His face was filled with wickedness. Sorry to interrupt, but you may not have the chance to return. As Liu Shi was imagining how he would proceed, a bland voice with a hint of laughter suddenly erupted from within the room. The sudden voice caused Liu Shi to freeze. His face changed as he turned around with great difficulty. A figure that was entirely covered in a black cloak slowly emerged from the shadows. What a careless girl. In the end, I am still required to put an end to it all. A young man's voice escaped from under the black cloak. His palm was lightly stretched out and a white heavenly flame slowly emerged. A heavenly flame. Seeing this strange white flame, Liu Shi's eyes narrowed and he involuntarily cried out in horror. Congratulations, you are correct. Here's your reward. With a smile, the black-cloaked man waved his hand. The gloomy white flame instantly left his hand. With lightning speed, it covered Liu Shi, burning him into a pile of ashes in the blink of an eye. Liu Shi did not even have the time to scream. From that moment forth, the alchemist known as Liu Shi vanished from the continent. Coldly clapping his hands, the black-cloaked man waved his hands once more. A wind swept away the ashes on the ground, leaving a clean floor. Then, he leisurely leapt from the window, soared into the air and sped off. Without alerting anyone, the black-cloaked man quickly left the GLI clan's home. His feet lightly touched the roof of a house, and just as he leapt for a couple dozens of meters, he suddenly paused. Helplessly sighing, he gradually lifted his head. On the edge of a tower to the side was a young lady in a golden dress who was randomly swinging her round snow-white feet. With limpid eyes that contained a golden flame, she was lazily staring at the black-cloaked man on the roof. "Who are you?" The young lady's finger gently touched the black hair that was lifted by the night breeze as she lifted her delicate chin. Her agile voice reverberated through the small space around them.